So, the wonderful Tom Sherrington is next up on It's Your Tom You're Wasting, or sorry, It's Your Time You're Wasting. And Tom, have you been wasting anyone's time this week? Have you been doing lots of work out there in the real world?
I've been wasting some people's time. Yeah, I've actually been to an actual school which is up in Runcorn, and it was quite exciting to go on a train and talk to real people, and I really enjoyed that. And I've been wasting some people's time on Zoom, as we all have been. So yeah, we're sort of back into business a little bit.
And are you finding the online life as stimulating as going into schools, or different, or just not as good?
Oh, it's nowhere near as good. I'm amazed how much you can actually do, but it's not remotely the same. And I've done some I did some big training things last week where every member of staff was at an exam desk in the hall, and it felt like I was about to sort of get them to start their exam, like as an invigilator. But
Well, let's hope they have a good algorithm to sort them out.
not exactly. But it was amazing. Actually, people are very, as long as you have a talk partner. This is the thing I've discovered. Talk partners is my new thing to use a phrase, because you have to say who when I say turn to somebody, who is it going to be and how far away are they? And as soon as somebody knows that they definitely have someone to talk to when you ask them to, everything goes swimmingly from there.
Well, it's good. It's good to see you, and it's good to see that you're still working well out there and doing things in the real world. I go back a long way. I think we first met in 2013 or 2014, and you took a great shine to my book Trivium, which I'm always very grateful for. And thank you for all your work and all your mentions of it over the years. What I'm interested in talking to you about today is Rosenshine. He's um, he's on everyone's lips, it seems, including the Times educational supplement, who ran an article raising some questions perhaps about the Rosenshinification. I can't even say that word. Rosenshinification of education. So it shows that your work is doing a lot of good out there, perhaps, but also raising some questions. Could you give me a short précis, perhaps, of the some of the criticisms in there about Rosenshine?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think it's pretty good that the TS is actually taking interest in saying, they've picked up on this sort of fairly extensive bandwagon effect of lots of people talking about something. So it's good that they wanted to sort of find out what it's all about, and also maybe prod at it and see if it stands up to scrutiny. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And some of the people in there's a couple of head teachers interviewed saying that we've got to make sure this doesn't become a be all and end all or some kind of robotic recipe. And I would agree with that caution. I think it's important. And in fact, the writer referenced Rosenshine's own caution about his own work, which is it doesn't apply to every type of teaching. There are things where students have to be creative or originate more thinking, analysis, and so on in maybe English literature, and some examples he gives. And so I think it's quite good that it drew attention to the fact that Rosenshine himself is saying, look, this has some boundaries around it. And then a researcher like Christian Bokov is coming in saying, look, what does the underlying research behind Rosenshine say? And some of it's quite old. So lots of cautions, lots of caveats. And I guess that's really healthy, isn't it? One of the things I found really interesting, one of the things that I
And
learned from the article was that Rosenshine had to squeeze his original 17 ideas into 10 because of the article. I didn't really realize that. So I didn't know that he had to sort of do this to fit the parameters of this American Educator publication. I thought maybe he'd have done that himself. But so look, with all of that said, I still feel like it comes up as a sort of pretty sensible set of ideas that a lot of people can use. So I guess having been subject to their investigation, I still think yeah, good. Well, despite all of that, I still think it's a really useful set of ideas. And I get that people have to be cautious about it. So in a way, I thought Rosenshine survived from the TS's spotlight.
so, what do you think the limitations of Rosenshine are? And do you think that some schools may be using it a bit too mechanically?
I think the main thing is it's about the two limits. One of them is it's a repertoire of techniques which you use appropriately when you need them over time. It's not for any given lesson. And any school which is trying to turn this into you must start with this and end with that is not really thinking very hard about it, I would say. And also, it doesn't. It's. I think it's important to keep saying it's the principles of instruction, not teaching, because an instructional teaching to me has a certain dynamic where you are trying to teach something very directly and get the students to understand what you're thinking and then embed that and practice it and so on. So there are other types of teaching where even something simple as reading a book, reading a book and thinking about what it means, and then that's not instructional teaching. Rosenshine doesn't talk about reading very much. So there's tons of things which don't apply. Behavior management techniques and relationships and all of those sorts of things. Well, anything where the students are kind of really the initiator, giving opinions. So Rosenshine is not a universal description. It doesn't even set out to be. So I think it's almost defines its own limits. But I still find it's very useful. The thing I find is great about it is that even with those limits, different subject teachers can be talking about questioning and modelling and scaffolding and guided practice to independent practice. I think these phrases are really, really useful, and nearly every subject has its form of them. So I think as long as we're clear that it doesn't apply to all things all the time, and it's how you do it that matters in your context, and we constantly think of it in that way, I think it's a useful way of framing the conversation so that everyone's talking about similar ideas.
Brilliant. That's good. That's good to hear, and very thoughtful as well. And I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in what you have to say. Particularly, I suppose, because I come from this background, it's particularly interesting to hear you talk about the limitations with perhaps creative work and where pupils need to make their own stuff. New knowledge, perhaps, I don't know, but that's really interesting. The other thing you are known about now, or known for, and it's all over social media with lots of those little interesting sort of drawings there, which you perhaps want to talk about, that is walkthroughs. Could you tell me a bit about those, please?
Well, this is a great collaboration with Oliver Caviglioli, where he's well known for illustrating nearly everybody's books, and he suggested we collaborated on a thing which he was interested in, which was step-by-step guides to common teaching practices to avoid this issue of lethal mutation and misunderstanding, where people think they're talking about the same thing, but because it's not defined well enough, they end up sort of at cross purposes and forgetting good ideas and distorting them. So we came up with this idea of, if we could spell everything out in 5 steps, it would just be a neat frame for having these discussions about what we're trying to work on in our practice. Yeah, so it's a really fun project. So I've started. Volume 1 came out, and in the summer when COVID happened, we decided to make this whole support package around it. So we made all these PowerPoint slides and videos, so that people could deliver training on their own without us having to go in using the books, but with all these slides, and that's been interesting. And now we're working on the second volume, which I was doing some writing of today, and it's such an interesting thought process. How do I do this thing I do a lot, or know how to do? Where would I start? What do I do next? What do I need to think about? And if you can break something down into 5 steps, you realize, gosh, do I really understand even what I mean by this idea? And it makes you think hard. And then obviously what happens then, Oliver picks that up on our shared document, and he'll try to illustrate that so it comes alive a bit and puts it into the frame of real people. So I love the whole process, and it's some of his drawings are kind of pretty wild. You just think, what the hell is he doing with this drawing? And it does make you stop and think. And sometimes they're just really sort of procedural. Like you can imagine a person doing this and doing that and doing that. But some of the more abstract ones I just think they're amazing. But they're not sort of literal. They're just sort of almost conceptual. And that adds interest to me. So I think the collaboration has been fun to do, and hopefully a lot of people are finding it useful.
That's it's good. It's good to hear about the difficulties of making just 5 steps out of something. You've asked me to do one for the Trivium, and of course, Trivium is famously 3. and to stretch it out to 5 is quite interesting as well. Though it's the huge complexity trying to put something down into simple terms. Do you think that's a danger, though, that making things too simple, perhaps, and that actually there is a lot of complexity out there that also needs to be covered?
I think it is a danger, but my honest feeling is that it's like the complexity is a given. I mean, I find that in nearly every place I work, the complexity is evident just in any discussion. It's just it's always way more complicated. The students are complicated, the curriculum's complicated. So having a simple frame, it just helps you think about all the complexity in a sort of disciplined way. You're not reducing anything down to some absurd, you know, tiny sort of steps. You just can't. It just makes you think about this, then this, then this, so that you can even engage with the complexity. That's what it's for, really. But I don't think the complexity is eliminated remotely, and that's good, because that's, you know, that's real life.
It is indeed, absolutely. And I suppose, like you say, it's the conversations around the books that matter as well, and the way that they're using it. I'm interested because you used to be a head teacher, famously, I think, of an international school, a grammar school, and a North London comprehensive school. And I think there might be others which I'm unaware of, but certainly also a deputy head and various
Yeah,
various other, I think, a physics teacher perhaps.
yeah.
What do you think the walkthroughs, the Rose and Shine, the learning rainforest, which we haven't talked about actually this evening, but all those things, which of those things do you think would most have changed the way you were head teachering or teaching at the time you were doing it, all those many years ago, Tom?
I think, if I'm absolutely honest, I think it's not necessarily any one of those three formats. It's just the fact of there being ideas which are definable and shareable, which is the key thing. So having names for things like cold calling as a questioning strategy, or the notion of retrieval practice linked to some memory model, which is quite coherent, like we're talking about working memory and long-term memory, and how that works. Now, I've talked about those. You know, Rosenshine talks about those. We've talked about that extensively in walkthroughs. Probably just because it's the most recent one, the walkthroughs might be the one I'd pick. But it's the ideas that I think have a coherence, which I think was missing earlier on, and therefore we're having lots of fairly waffly conversations about how to improve our practice, and losing meaning constantly. So therefore, losing energy and momentum, and lots of people leaving a room where we all feel that we agreed with each other at the time, only to discover that we all interpreted this idea totally differently. Uh, so that to me, to have now something where I can say, well, look, let's not guess, let's look at something which says what we think it is, and then we can base our ideas on this. And that's the whole purpose of the walkthroughs, almost, is to say, let's define a few things so that we can start debating the same thing. That's what I think is the best thing, and actually that's the feedback we've had from some schools, that it's just the sort of
I think
the thing to
I
look
mean,
at.
I think you're absolutely right there. The importance of a lexicon, if you like,
Mm,
the importance of that, and how actually defining the terms, being absolutely clear what the terms might mean in our context, and making sure that every teacher within the school understands what you mean by something when you say it. And that is something, with the changeover of staff, though, and all those things, it's quite difficult to get teachers into the grooves, shall we say, when there's lots and lots of things. I mean, even something as famous as growth mindset or something like that became interpreted in so many different ways in so many different places, that a teacher comes into from one school to another thinking it means this, but goes into another context and finds out it means perhaps something totally different, or if anything at all. So yeah, the lexicon, how to make people agree to it, and then moving around from teacher training through school, and
yeah,
then,
I think
how to make it the same thing in every place that you work and find yourself working. Is that easy?
I don't think it's easy, but I think what happens. I mean, and Oliver helps with this sort of thinking. That he brings in this thinking around, 3 point communication, and citing various other researchers, which mentioned in the front of our walkthrough book, about the issue of, in a dialogue which is verbal, you have this problem of volatility of the idea. So you might be, let's say we're talking about a thing we've observed in a classroom, but is on our memory, and we're thinking we both have experienced it or talked about it. But actually, we all know that the experience can be, the way we recount things can be different. But then when you got the walkthrough, you're sort of looking at something that's tangible in front of you. There it is. There's a visual representation of it as well. So we can both look at the same thing together simultaneously and say, is this what's happening in your lesson? Do you do that? Are you finding that difficult? And the kind of things we're discussing aren't moving. They're there. But of course, that could be a physics lesson in year 11, or it could be a music lesson in year 7 or whatever. And it's the thing itself takes form in different contexts, but the concepts and the framework is sort of stable, and that keeps the conversations meaningful. So I think that's massively powerful. And in my work now, sort of when I work closely with certain organizations, when I go back to them and see them repeatedly, and it's so interesting how often we just you realize that the thing you thought you'd really explained or discussed in very detail sort of 3 months ago is just gone, because it's just in their head it meant something else. So that happens all the time.
Yeah. Look, Tom. The thing I think I most admire about you is your sheer energy, enthusiasm, and the way you've got lots of projects on the go all the time, it seems. So the other thing, the last thing tonight that I want to talk to you about is curriculum masterclasses. So you're running these curriculum masterclasses with, I suppose, masters. I don't know what to call them in a masterclass. People who have perhaps some expertise, and I know some of them by name, and some of them by being one of them, in fact. Can you tell me a bit about what you're doing there and what you hope to achieve by these curriculum masterclasses, when they are, a bit of a build up for them, perhaps, and give me some of the names.
Yes. So they started off life last year or the year before, actually, when Mary Myatt and I were discussing doing some events, and we did them live to begin with. And we felt that the research ed events were, although they're amazing, we always feel like we ran out of time, like we just that little bit more time. So we thought, well, how do we do an event where you buy a bit more time to say what you want to say in a slightly more sort of expanded way and give time for questions. So we did these live events with John Tomset. We invited to join us as well. So we made a little trio, and we found that people signed up for these things, and we were quite amazed by the interest. With the COVID, we had one planned, but we realized we can't do it live. So we offered people to still come along to a webinar. And actually, we thought we'd lose sales. People would just cancel. But actually, even more people wanted to come. So we realized actually it's even more accessible to do it online than it is in person, because people can do it from anywhere in the country, and actually some occasionally. So we ran a trial last summer, and it worked. So this time we wanted to do it, but we thought we can't keep doing the Tom, Mary and John show. We'll run out of stuff to talk about for a start. So we thought we've got this platform, and it seems to work. Let's just make it a thing where we invite people to have a platform, and let's make it as diverse as possible and sustain it. So we've actually planned 5 events. One is in October 15th and 16th. One's in December on the 1st and 2nd. But there'll be more, which we haven't even done the lineups for, in March, May, and June. So there are 5. Now we thought, well, to get people in to do a 90-minute sort of wraparound with the input and the questions, how do you do that? Well, you have to over 2 days. But then we're selling tickets because we think that people should be, it's paid for their time and stuff. But the model is you buy one ticket and you can watch live, if you have 2 days off, 6 masterclasses, or what was most likely to happen, you share it out so different people can watch each one, but they'll all be recorded. So you'll end up with 6 sort of 80-minute webinars, which you can use anytime you like with anyone in your school to watch later as a CPD. So we think that's pretty good value, talking like 6 recorded and the length means that you've got time to really send out some ideas. So Mary Myatt, for example, talking for 70 minutes about curriculum is really a real learning process. when John Tomset does his, he lays out this whole story of curriculum change in his school, and you learn a lot as you're going along, because he tells this whole story and you get into the detail, which is often missing in some of these talks, that you lose detail. So obviously, we made this list, and it's just, with so many people we want to ask, and you were one of the first people we thought about because of Trivium and your most recent book, Athena versus the Machine. And then you can see some of the other people we've asked are people who are practicing school leaders. So we thought we can't just have all people who are sort of ex-teacher consultant types. we want people telling the story of their actual curriculum journeys. So you've got people like Benny Chiara, who's doing a thing about her curriculum design. A guy called Jeffrey Quay, who's a school leader in an academy, and later on in December, Deborah Kidd, who does lots of curriculum design, very hands-on with primary and secondary schools. So I won't list all of the names. Claire Seeley, but there's some people who are sort of known for their curriculum books, and others who are just are practitioners, and hopefully a good range. And the people we've got starting to line up for March, it's another whole range of different voices. So I think the sharing the platform thing, someone sort of got to me over this in the summer, and I saw a thing where I just thought, you're right, you've got a platform, you should try to share it. And I felt that this was a good opportunity, and it's so far it seems to be going well, and people are signing up.
Well, that's good to hear. We're going to flash up some details about the curriculum masterclasses, and of course, all this stuff on Rosenshine, and the walkthroughs are all available at all good booksellers online and in real life that you can find yourself trotting along to. Tom, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you this evening. I hope you're going to be busy over the next few weeks and months, and I'm sure you will be. And keep doing what you're doing. It's great stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for wasting my time, and I've enjoyed wasting it with you. It's been a real pleasure.